Alright, so my presentation is on ethnography of the ordinary. Well, this is my part of it. So I'm going to start off talking about Raymond Williams and his piece, Culture is Ordinary. So he describes culture as being a way of life, a combination of moments of everyday life combined with things like the media that circulates within our society. He also looks at the way all of these sort of puzzle pieces fit together to form what he calls national cultures. However, the complex details of the workings of everyday life often get overlooked when it comes to how we perceive cultures other than our own. And essentially, he makes the point that the portrayal of culture that's most publicly represented by media or sometimes a region's own government isn't a full, accurate picture of what that culture actually is. Going back to his main idea that culture is ordinary, he explains that growing up in a country inevitably means seeing the ways people and society operate and the way those operations change over time. Growing up within a family, he says, means seeing the ways people develop and grow over time and how relationships within that family change. And experiencing these things is practically unavoidable, so he's saying that experiencing the shifts within small structures is what pieces together to form the concept of culture as a whole. And his argument is that the seemingly unimportant experiences of everyday life are no less important to the concept of culture than things like religious practices or the way we dress. He talks about his experiences through his own childhood in his writing, touching on things like the occupations of his family members and familiar spots throughout the city he grew up in. And he talks about how things changed and eventually aims to explain that cultures change and adapt as time goes on, but there is no one true definition of a correct version of culture. His focus is to explain that there may be differences within one culture over time, or differences between different cultures that people may try and make comparisons between, but doing so isn't really effective since within one culture, neither version of, whether it be present or past, neither version of a culture can be considered correct or incorrect. And between two different cultures, by making comparisons and saying two things from two cultures are alike, erases the details that makes each culture distinct and unique. So in Ordinary Affects by Kathleen Stewart, she makes a similar point. And between both of these pieces, there's kind of an overarching theme that boils down to the idea that it's the seemingly unimportant aspects of everyday life that make culture really feel like a complex experience rather than an oversimplified concept of what life is like in other places. And I think this quote kind of captures that pretty well. So there's a book called The Smoking Book by Leslie Stern. It's a collection of short writings linked only by mentions of smoking and nothing else. So not location and not one particular point of view. The collecting of these stories joins together different moments and situations across cultures without erasing the details that make those cultures different. And it does so by using an ordinary everyday thing like the act of smoking. So, this is where the learning activity comes in. It was inspired a lot by The Smoking Book. It was going to be that everyone would take out a piece of paper and not write their name down so that whatever they wrote down wouldn't be associated with them. Maybe that would be a little less scary. Everyone would take a few minutes and write down a quick story of a time that they wrote to someone in whatever form that may take. Hence the visuals. So it could have been text message, writing someone a letter, email, AIM, chat. So we'd then collect the papers after a few minutes and redistribute them so that everyone would have another person's paper and they could read it and have someone else's unique perspective on the same topic that they wrote about. And who knows, maybe that would have led to a quick discussion if anything was surprising about the shift in perspective. Who knows? So touching a little bit on modern day, we have a sort of fascination with the concept of recording the workings of the ordinary. And that's reflected not only in academic fields like sociology and cultural studies, but also in pop culture and the media we produce and consume. For example, things like reality TV or fly-on-the-wall style documentaries. Despite the understanding that we all generally have that it's scripted or at the very least produced, the popularity of the genre still speaks to how drawn we are to the idea of viewing the everyday workings of the lives of other people. An example that came to mind for me was the documentary Babies, where 4 babies from 4 different cultures were filmed throughout their day-to-day lives without a focus on the adults of the culture. So here's a quick bit from the trailer. I'm going to start it right around here. What I really like about this documentary, just personally, is that I think it doesn't highlight the differences of other cultures to belittle them or diminish them in any way. It just kind of shows that the norms of everyday life are so different and unique. I think the documentary is not only a good example of our fascination with that fly-on-the-wall style documentary, but also that the film itself does a really good job of documenting the ordinary. And because it doesn't even really feature dialogue from the adults, which would come with an inherently more blatant communication of their views or opinions on anything within their cultures, it really boils it down to a simple, just recording of the ordinary, essentially. So that was my part of the slideshow.